With the brilliance of your wisdom, O compassionate one, illuminate the darkness enclosing my mind, enlighten my intelligence and wisdom, so that I may gain insight into the Buddha's words and the texts that explain them. So, as you probably remember, we're studying the 6 paramitas. And this comes in the context of the explaining basically the training of the Bodhisattva vow. So many of us have taken the Bodhisattva vow, and in doing so, then the training consists of developing bodhicitta, which very often is translated as, kind heart, altruism, and so on, which is definitely correct, but it's also a lot more. And it's essentially a condition of magnanimity, of greatness of mind, that understands the nature of phenomena, emptiness, and within this absence of solidity also cultivating the warmth, or allowing the warmth that naturally emerges from the absence of the confusion, and particularly the confusion on the personal self. It's often that when we're, you could say, caught up in egocentricity, we cut ourselves off, and we cut ourselves off from a natural disposition of warmth. So this compassion is really innate to our Buddha nature. And in the process of the Mahayana path, we are cultivating it. On one hand, we cultivate it through reflection, through training the mind and thinking about others. But on another hand, also, we recognize that this quality is, you could say, innate, spontaneous. And so both through the practice of the developing the bodhicitta in terms of what we call relative bodhicitta, which is then the bodhicitta of wishing to benefit others, and then the engagement with this attitude in practice, what we call the bodhicitta of action, or the bodhicitta of application. In doing that, we are cultivating it from the point of view of creating causes and conditions for this to emerge. But from the absolute bodhicitta, from the point of view of what we call absolute bodhicitta, this is actually spontaneously present, and it's from resting in this absence of ordinary confusion, which we do, for example, in the practice of meditation, and we'll be looking at that now, that then we connect with an already abiding quality that is open and free of the ordinary confused self-centering, and which naturally possesses this greatness of mind, this wisdom and this compassion. Now, then in terms of the bodhicitta of application, then there are the paramitas, which are the practices of that basically take us there. The paramita means to go beyond, or to take us beyond. And that's where the quality of the paramitas really is, that these are actions that operate with our normal dualistic sense of self and other, that actually take us beyond self and beyond other. For example, the practice of generosity. So we've looked at all these: generosity, discipline, patience, diligence, and now we're looking at the practice of meditation, which, as we have seen then, is very much associated with finding a condition of calm. And last time we looked at the environment. And it's clear that in the modern context, finding the ideal environment as you had it in the Buddhist civilizations that we've had in Asia is difficult, but also not impossible. And I mean, we're familiar with that. There are retreat centers, and there are places we can go into retreat. The point is really that we need to set some boundaries where we can have peace. So we do that either in terms of going to a very peaceful location, which would be ideal, but not always practical. And then simply just regarding wherever we practice, wherever we are, as the place of solitude. So it could be our cushion, wherever we choose to meditate. That is a place where we set some boundaries. Might just be that we sit there for an hour or for half an hour, practice meditation, but nevertheless, this is in some way creating a context of solitude, boundaries. So So let's see here. The text now will go on to, from having talked about the wonderful places we can go to, and also if you read The Way of the Bodhisattva, there's such a beautiful, very poetic praise of such places. But having now looked at that, we're going to look at the actual practice itself. So here it says, 103, 104. Resting there in perfect concentration defines the higher training of the mind. Because they're interlinked, the body placed in Vairochana's sevenfold posture acts as vital axis of the mind. Strive in stable meditation. Place the mind upon one thing, not straying to another. Checking that the target's held, whatever it may be, the mind is thereby fastened to its virtuous object. All appearances contrived by thought will sink into the Dharmata. This is actually interesting. This actually speaks about, you could say, the scope of meditation from the very most basic level to really the highest practice of meditation. So Kangyur Rinpoche then, in his commentary, he says, practitioners should stay in solitude and rest in concentration without allowing themselves to be carried away by distraction even for a moment. So this also applies to when we're sitting there in our urban situation on our cushion. This constitutes the higher training of the mind. Because body and mind are interrelated, if one adopts a correct physical posture, the subtle channels with their energies will be straight, and this will facilitate the birth of realization in the mind. Actually, you very often hear that we say, if the body is straight, then the nadis are straight, the energy channels. If the nadis are straight, then the prana is straight, meaning the prana, then the energy of the body runs unobstructed. And if the prana is straight, we say the bindu is straight, meaning consciousness is clear. Kangyur Rinpoche says, it is therefore important to sit on a comfortable seat and adopt the sevenfold posture of Vairochana. The legs should be crossed in the full or half Vajra position. I think many of you know that, but just for good measure, we say that the feet resting on the thighs, or in the case of half Vajra, with one foot resting on the thigh of the other leg, the other foot being tucked underneath. So that's where, for example, I'm sitting here with my left foot up on my right foot up on my left thigh, and the left foot is tucked in under. So this actually gives a very solid base. Now you could also do so that you take both feet and put them up on the thighs. This is what we in yoga then call lotus position. In the Buddhist context, at least in the Tibetan Buddhist context, we call this the Vajra position. So you can see basically how deities and saints and so on are depicted in the tankas. So that's the Vajra posture. And then again, you sometimes have the foot extended. So that's called the Gyalpo Riltap. Well, it's sort of the Bodhisattva's way of sitting sometimes. Like, for example, Tara. Or up here you have Jigme Lingpa with one leg extended. So this is very often interpreted as one leg symbolizing that's tucked in, symbolizes wisdom, and the other, the leg extended, symbolizes, you could say, engaging. You could say moving outward, as in compassion. So then it says the eyelids should be lowered and the eyes should be gazing along the line of the nose. Now, I'd like to be so irreverent as to say that's a little bit difficult. If you ever try to look down your nose, you're going to get, yeah, your eyes are going to hurt. Actually, in some scriptures, it says as if you're plowing a field. And Chögyam Trungpa very kindly adapted this to modernity in saying as if you're pushing a pram or perhaps a shopping cart. That sort of looking down. So the legs, the gaze, and it says the body should be kept straight, not leaning to one side or another. The shoulders should be level, yeah, like that. The chin should be slightly tucked in so that the nose is in line with the navel. Yeah. The tip of the tongue should rest on the palate behind the teeth. The breath should be allowed to rise and fall slowly and naturally. This posture is referred to as the life tree or vital axis of the mind, for it helps to prevent it from getting lost in distraction. The Tibetan word for axis then, or the life tree or vital axis in Tibetan is Sokshin. So this when we're sitting like that, we actually create a posture that facilitates calm. You say in and of itself, the postures may be just that we just become calm, but that's already valuable. So on one hand, we have the skillful means of the body being calm, and when the body is calm, then it's easier for the mind to be calm. So that's where this position, the sevenfold posture of Varachana, is, you could say, a structure that allows for physical calm and implicitly also assists the mental calm. So this helps the mind from getting lost in distraction, like tying a feeble sapling to a firm support. Yeah, you know how we tie up our plants, or if we're growing green peas, what's it called, sweet peas, and so on. One must then strive in concentration, keeping the mind balanced in equipoise and focusing it exclusively on the object of concentration, without letting it stray elsewhere, even to virtuous objects, let alone negative ones, and without letting it lapse into a sort of shapeless blankness. So that's where the concentration is really important. So that's where, even if when we're sitting meditating and then we think, oh yeah, I'd really like to, put up prayer flags, or I'd like to, clean my shrine, or I'd like to do, and these are of course virtuous thoughts, but sorry, when we're meditating, then even that is a distraction. So that's where we would say the ordinary concepts of good and bad, we leave aside. When we're focusing, then we just adopt the concentration on the object. Also, what we don't want is to sit there and just be blank. And of course, also, we don't want to be, just distracted in any way. But we might think, oh yeah, to just sit there and be sort of like just calm in a dull sense, that's meditation. This is not the case. We want the mind to have a quality of wakefulness. And that's where we want to avoid this sort of blank state. The object on which the mind should focus pointedly may be with or without form. Okay, so this is where we can have it says here, in the present context of shamatha meditation, form refers to visible objects, such as a pebble or an image or visualization of the Buddha and so on. Formless refers to the breath, emptiness, the mind, and so on. So that's where you have practices where you actually visualize the Buddha. Some of you will be familiar with Jakob Leschly Rinpoche's Treasury of Blessings that we often practice, or even just invoking the presence of the Buddha. And that's where that is then the object of visualization that we could somehow have, and that's referred to form. Formless then is when we just come back to the breath. So there's nothing to be seen, but at the same time, we do have a clear reference. Emptiness in this case means analysis, that we're actually thinking about emptiness. And in general, just focusing and analyzing the mind. There's still some conceptual reference point going on. So then 105. Things appear uninterruptedly, but not considering such things as truly real. The mind remains without discursiveness upon its object. This is meditative equipoise or shamatha. Vipassana, which shares its nature, is post-meditation. Now, this is kind of interesting because, of course, when we're practicing and we're sustaining non-distraction, which is shamatha, the non-distraction in itself is, you could say, shamatha, but the vipassana really only happens when we have discerning to what we experience. So just having calm doesn't necessarily mean that we become wiser. That's why there's always jokes in the tradition about, that it's all very good to practice shamatha, but watch out you don't end up like a marmot or a hibernating bear and so on. So there's references to various, you could say, conditions that are peaceful but not particularly awake. So non-distraction in itself is important for sure, but without discerning, it doesn't really become vipassana. And it's only when there's appearances, thoughts, perceptions, and that's why we here refer to that as post-meditation, that we apply then the wisdom in our perception and our engagement with the objects. You could say the fact that we, through study, basically through analysis, have established that phenomena don't have inherent existence. And that's why, sorry, we are going to have to study Madhyamika. We're going to have to look at the Prajnaparamita. We're going to have to do analysis. It doesn't mean we become intellectuals. Many people think, oh, if I analyze, I'm becoming an intellectual. If I study Madhyamika, I'm going to become an intellectual and all of that. But it's just we need to actually have established the absence of ultimate reality in phenomena. And that's where that insight, if we have that, then we're not fooled by appearances. And that's where we talk about that as analytical meditation, or also as a form of vipassana. Also, to simply have the appearances and not fixate on them is also sometimes referred to as vipassana, and it's more along the lines of what we then call settling meditation. Anyway, all of this will be discussed, but just so that we understand that when it here says that shamatha is meditation and vipassana is post-meditation, it simply refers to the condition of the non-distraction itself, which is shamatha, and the discerning, which understands the nature of appearances. So Kangyur Rinpoche then says here, the time of meditation should be gradually extended. At length, all that appears to the mind, contrived and fixed upon by thought, will vanish into emptiness, the ultimate reality. So gradually we become more and more familiar with the practice of meditation, and it has a tremendous value in terms of our sanity, in terms of our wisdom. And gradually the dualistic perceptions, they dissolve. Kangyur Rinpoche says, this is not a state of nothingness in which nothing can be perceived. All phenomena, forms and so forth, appear unobstructedly, but they have no true existence. They lack all concrete attributes, with the result that there is in fact nothing real to observe. This is because dualistic perception, which apprehends things as truly existent, completely vanishes. Let's see what this little thing says. Jigme Lingpa. So this is, this would refer to simply just, contrived perception. But it basically means deluded perception. So that means that it doesn't mean that all of a sudden things disappear, but it just means that our misunderstanding reality ceases. And that's where the ordinary perception of things as being solid, that is something that is freed. That sort of, you could say, artificial projection onto phenomena is remedied. So he says, for the mind has merged with the fundamental nature of things. So that's where, when there's no longer deception, the mind finds, you could say, finds its way home, if you like. It settles into how things are. And that's where then there's a beautiful quote then from the Samadhi Raj Sutra that says, concentration is the even ground, peaceful, subtle, not to be observed. Since all perceptions are subdued, it is the holding of the very depths. Now, this is an important term, clarified here where it says to hold the depths is the literal translation of the Tibetan term for concentration, or, you know, the word samadhi, tingedzin, to actually be, you could say, deeply engaged in the nature of things without being confused, without being distracted, or deluded rather. When the mind remains in such a state, without torpor or excitement, dwelling one-pointedly on its objects, undisturbed by thoughts, this is meditation, namely shamatha. The perfect recognition of the mind's nature of primal wisdom, or the absence of clinging to the object of concentration, is post-meditation, namely vipassana. Okay, so one is the shamatha, is the being undisturbed, and the other is the recognition that things are free of the solidity that we project onto them. That refers both to our own person, doesn't have the solidity that we think we do. We are not the big deal that we think we are. The notion of self is a deluded label on what is in fact an assembly, what we call the aggregates or skandhas on the personal level. And similarly also the elements outside that we sometimes refer to as the 5 elements, the external world. That also doesn't have the solidity that we project onto it. And this is not something that we just have to say, yes, the Buddha says so, so we believe that, but it's based on us actually investigating, analyzing, and finding the truth of the matter. So that's where the analytical meditation establishes that insight. But then once we have that, then we're justified in not clinging and simply just leaving the mind without following after the ordinary deluded projections of the mind. And that's where we would say the absence of clinging to the object. So that's where we then have the condition of what we call post-meditation that's associated with then more discerning with regards to the phenomena that we experience. So one, you could say shamatha, non-distraction, vipassana, discerning, or wider perspective, as it literally means. Then it says here, Kangyur Rinpoche says, shamatha and vipassana partake of the same nature. The Ratna Mega, which is one sutra, gives the following definition. Shamatha is the one-pointed concentration of the mind. Vipassana is perfect discernment. So this is important. And here then there's a little footnote that says, in other words, shamatha and vipassana are 2 aspects of the one state of mind. This distinction in terms of meditation, Tibetan nyamsha, and post-meditation, jetop, is discussed at greater lengths later in the chapter. So we'll be discussing this a fair bit. 106, the categories of meditation. 3 kinds of concentration are distinguished. Concentration that's enjoyed by childish beings, concentration that discerns with clarity, and the perfect concentration of the Tathagatas. There are 4 samadhis following 4 criteria: the absence or the presence of discursiveness, both gross and subtle, and the rest. Likewise, there exist 4 formless concentrations. So we'll look at that. So Kangyur Rinpoche says, there are 3 kinds of concentration. First, there is the childish concentration of ordinary beings. This is the concentration enjoyed by beings who have entered one or other of the, who have not entered one or the other of the 3 vehicles. So this is where we would say meditation is well known among all cultures. It's famous in all religions, and even within the Abrahamic traditions. You know, for example, we have in the Christian tradition in France, you have what's called charter houses, châteaux, where the monastics really just practice incredible simplicity and essentially what we would call meditation. Likewise, also throughout India and China and the entire of Asia, you have so many traditions where there is this practice of settling the mind, but they might not be based on insight into enlightenment. They might not be based on understanding how the mind can be ultimately freed from dualistic delusion. It could simply just be that there's a wonderful value in simply having a peaceful mind, which, of course, also is something that's very desirable. But it doesn't lead, this is not the path of enlightenment. So that's where this refers to those that have not entered the three vehicles. Let's see here. And that's referring then to how we generally classify what's known as the three vehicles: Shravakayana, Pratyeka-Buddhayana, and Bodhisattvayana. This, by the way, is how we normally understand the three yanas in the classical sense. I think I've mentioned it before, but for example, Chögyam Trungpa's classification of three yanas into Hinayana, Mahayana, and Vajrayana is essentially based on what we then call the three vows, the three sets of vows, or the three sets of discipline, which is then the Pratimoksha that we've seen before, the Bodhisattva discipline, and then the Vidyadhara discipline. So the childish concentration, first of the three kinds. The second is the clearly discerning concentration of the worldly mind. This is the concentration for those who have entered one of the vehicles and is the cause of the realization of the path of seeing. So that's already that which takes us through the path of accumulation, the path of joining, and enables us then to arrive at the path of seeing. And that basically is then understanding the nature of things. So that's where what we generally then would practice as at the for a large part of the path. Finally, there is the excellent concentration of the Tathagatas, which is the preserve of those who are on the noble path. And that's again for beings that no longer are deeply entangled in confused projections. So that's the path of seeing and beyond, referring to what we call the path of meditation and also the path of no more learning. Anyway, we'll look at first the childish concentration, which is childish from the point of view of the absence of wisdom, but at the same time, as far as you could say us ordinary neurotic beings go, it's not altogether that undesirable. It's not all that bad. The samadhis and the formless concentrations, and these are, you could say, the scope of yogic systems. The samadhis and the formless concentrations constitute the concentration that's enjoyed by childish beings, those who have not entered any of the paths. The concentration of those who have embraced accumulation and the path of joining makes the path of freedom manifest. Their concentration thus is clearly discerning. So, childish concentration is then, there are four samadhis of form, distinguished according to four criteria, namely the presence or absence of gross discursiveness, subtle discursiveness, joy, and bliss. In addition, there are four formless absorptions, the absorption of infinite space, and so forth. These 8 absorptions together constitute the first kind of concentration, known as the childish enjoyment concentration, so called because they pertain to ordinary beings who have yet to enter one or another of the three paths. We will now consider certain details of these concentrations. So let's just see, there's a footnote here regarding childish enjoyment concentration. The expression enjoyment concentration refers to the fact that this kind of concentration results in the enjoyment of the higher realms. Now, of course, it's really interesting. In some ways, very provocative for us who live in a culture where we actually haven't mapped this. You know, when children go to school, they're supposed to learn the periodic table, right? I remember we had to learn something like 108 or 100, now probably 120 or whatever. various kinds of elements, that constitute the physical world. And you're also told how to, know the geography of the world and all these kind of things, which, of course, constitute the way that we see the world, and which is very much part of what we think it is to be educated. And also within science, then we have various kinds of sciences that within the natural sciences of various kinds, we think knowledge. But here's a much more sophisticated natural science that is about what happens to the mind when it's not distracted. So this comes from a very evolved civilization where something like meditation is completely new in our culture. This has then been practiced for a very long time, millennia. By the time this was written, then there had already been practitioners of meditation for something like 5 millennia. So that's where you have an incredible heritage of understanding the mind. So while this is something that is not, you could say, recommended, because we'd like to sort of actually get beyond that, there's also an awareness that is commonly practiced, So you make consumer choices about various kinds of things. And that's where you can say, well, some people, they like bicycles, and some people, they prefer, cars or whatever. And there's simply just an awareness of you have different options. So anyway, just a word about you could say, the source, the context in which this discussion, traditionally has been taking place. One, then the 4 samadhis of form. So this is then the where we then practice samadhi, or practice focusing the mind, or practice meditation, in order to achieve something that is essentially pleasant. We might even think of it as salvation, but essentially it results in places of higher existence that goes beyond even this life. And that's where you have tales of great sages that enter into samadhi when they pass away, and so on. So it says here, the 4 samadhis of form. The first samadhi comprises the preparatory stage of the samadhi and the actual samadhi itself. Various kinds of meditation may be used as preparation. However, practitioners who are only on the worldly path meditate on the harsh characteristics of the desire realm and the peaceful serenity of the superior states. So the harsh characteristics of the desire realm, that kind of corresponds to nowadays when people say, oh, there must be more to life than just, being a slave to money and a career and empty objectives such as, this kind of thing. So that's where in the Indian context, we would say, well, we're here very briefly and we're going to die. And these kind of, the sensory world as we have it is not going to bring us happiness. So that insight then creates the motivation to engage with something that would take us beyond the superior states. It says at the outset, the mind of the realm of desire, and the realm of desire then is the world that we live in, basically, is considered as something coarse, agitated, and inferior. From this perspective, the state of the first samadhi is seen as peaceful, happy, and supremely advantageous. One is thus continually preoccupied with it, learning and reflecting about it. So here you then have, you could say, presumably a culture that removes itself from the world, like a monastic culture or ashram, where you then engage with the pursuit of samadhi. The time will come when learning and reflection are transcendent, and the samadhi will be experienced in meditation. Until the 6 defilements of the desire realm, and let's see what that is. These are the 6 defilements are attachment, aversion, pride, ignorance, doubt, and wrong views. So when we have studied and really understand the practice of meditation, then engaging in it, we then abandon these 6 defilements. And that's where you have these 6 also in a great and moderate degree of intensity. These are then discarded, and the meditator is considered to be in the preparatory stage of the samadhi. Subsequently, as the emotions of the lesser degree associated with the desire realms are discarded, the samadhi itself is experienced. You know, it's also interesting that here it's not treated as something mystical that just happens to some people, you know, but really something that is accessible to anybody. It's simply just a question of training. The first samadhi has 5 aspects: gross discursiveness, subtle discursiveness, joy, bliss, and concentration. With regards to the first 2 aspects, the qualification as gross and subtle is made in accordance with the Abhidharma. So that's where we have in the Buddhist teaching the Abhidharma, which very much is, you could say, the teachings on experience, how subjective experience is the various categories of subjective experience, sometimes also referred to as Buddhist phenomenology. Indeed, gross discursiveness refers to a rough judgment as to whether the mind is in correct concentration, while subtle discursiveness is a more refined investigation of the same thing. So this we also know from ourselves when we are meditating. We can have a very sort of gross in the sense of knowing whether the mind is distracted or not. And then also there's a more refined, where while we're not distracted, we're also aware of not being entangled the way we ordinarily are. As the mind rests in concentration, the consciousness is suffused with happiness. This is what is meant by joy. Basically, this is where we disentangle ourselves and we're just not so worried. A physical sensation of bliss arises from perfect flexibility. Okay, let's see what it says here. Xinjiang. So this is sometimes also translated as proficiency. This refers to virtuosity in training, in the course of which all negative aspects of body and mind are eliminated. Xinjiang. Finally, concentration refers to the fact that the mind remains focused one-pointedly. So, the second samadhi has 4 aspects: perfect limpidity, joy, bliss, and concentration. Perfect limpidity normally denotes mindfulness, vigilance, and mental evenness. But in this context, it refers to the fact that one is never separated from the flow of mental joy. The 3 remaining aspects are the same as for the first samadhi. So that's where we then have the joy, and so forth. The joy, concentration. Anyway, yeah, it was mentioned earlier. So that's where the second samadhi is defined in this way, and then the third samadhi has 5 aspects: bliss, evenness, mindfulness, vigilance, and concentration. The meaning of bliss is the same as above. Evenness refers to the fact that the mind rests effortlessly in its natural flow, free from all torpor or agitation. Mindfulness means not to forget to concentrate. Vigilance is the constant confirmation that neither torpor nor agitation is occurring. Finally, concentration is as previously described. So we're referring to these samadhis as, you could say, childish, part of the childish, the scope of the childish. But the truth of the matter is, from our perspective, these actually are samadhis that might not bring us enlightenment, but they're still very profound. We'd be very impressed when we meet someone like that. You know, you might meet some sage of whatever denomination who possesses this, and they'd be very impressive. The fourth samadhi has four aspects: mindfulness, neutrality of feeling, evenness, and concentration. Mindfulness and concentration are as just described. Neutrality of feeling refers to the state of undifferentiated sensation, while evenness is as described in relation to the third samadhi. So here I think this neutrality and undifferentiated sensation also refers to this amazing quality that some great beings would have, where they simply can bear incredible pain without necessarily being affected by it, a bit like the Stoics and so on. The possession of the five aspects of gross and subtle discursiveness and so on belongs to the rudimentary stage of the first samadhi. Samten Dangbo and Mushi Sampupa. So beginners of the first samadhi. This is all still classified as, you can say, beginning. When rough discursiveness is relinquished, but subtle discursiveness remains, the extraordinary first samadhi is attained. When both gross and subtle discursiveness are relinquished, the second samadhi occurs. When both gross and subtle thoughts, together with mental joy, are absent, the third samadhi is attained. What we mean here with the absence of the absence of mental joy is more the attachment to it. While the absence of these three factors together with that of physical bliss is characteristic of the fourth samadhi. Regardless of whether the meditator attains actual samadhi, the authentic and pure preparatory stage for the first samadhi constitutes the foundation of vipassana, for which reason it is referred to as all-sufficing preparation. The preparatory stage and the rudimentary and extraordinary phases of the first samadhi are sometimes counted separately, so that taking them together with the three remaining samadhis, one becomes what is referred to as the 6 levels of samadhi. Okay, I have to confess that when Kangyur Rinpoche here refers to this as the foundation of vipassana, if you were to ask me, how is that? Because it sounds like normally when we describe the samadhis, that really just as a form of shamatha, calm abiding. I guess the vipassana here is the discerning that lies in relinquishing the attachment and also what hinders the practice. So that's where there would be an element of vipassana in this first, in these samadhis. So that's what we call the samadhis of form. And that's also a little bit in the context of when we talk about our world, you know, in the Buddhist teaching, you very often talk about what we call the 3 realms. And these are what we call the desire realm, Kamarupa, and then the, Kamaloka. And then we talk about the form realm, which is actually then the God realms. So, and then the Arupa Loka, which is the formless. These are how we understand the world in the Indian and also in the Buddhist context. So what we call the world of desire, that's essentially our human world and the lower realms as well. That's all referred to as the desire realm, simply because there's not really any spirituality taking place. The form world, the worlds of form, or the realms of form, they're all ready for those who have engaged in some degree of spirituality, so have some appreciation for the key role of spirituality, and they then inhabit what we would call the God realms. Then you could say the real pros within this, those who really manage profound absorption, are then what we're looking at now, the formless absorptions. But these are actually how we classify, you could say, existence in the Buddhist context. So there's There's the world of desire, which is pretty lost. And so then those with some direction, they're the form realm. And then the formless, you could say perfecting the practice of samadhi. So there's a lot of, you could say there's science around this. And there's also a fair bit of, you could say, respect. But at the same time, from the point of view of enlightenment, this is again still just, it's a difference, like Paul Rinpoche said, it's a difference between when you're stuck in a jar, being in the upper part of the jar or in the lower part of the jar. So you're still not free. Nevertheless, in the context of Buddhist meditation, there is this culture of looking at how these ordinary absorptions they're understood and practiced. So here then, the formless absorptions. The formless absorptions are not classified according to respective aspects, but are differentiated mainly according to their referent and accompanying attitude. When the fourth samadhi is attained, three kinds of perception are arrested. The perception of shape, so that's, we see square, round, etc. The perception of color, white, yellow, red, green, etc. And finally, the perception of the solidity of objects, such as houses or mountains. Meditating on the space-like nature of all phenomena, the practitioner goes beyond all form-related perceptions and rests in a state that is similar to space, in an absorption which is then called infinite space. When even the apprehension of space is relinquished, the meditator remains simply in a state of consciousness within which the notion of space has been conceived. This absorption is called infinite consciousness. When the apprehension of this mere consciousness is relinquished, a perception of nothingness appears. The absorption is therefore referred to as utter nothingness. When even this apprehension is discarded and the experience of apprehending nothingness is analyzed, all coarse movements of perception cease, and the mind dwells in an extremely subtle state, which is the absorption of neither perception nor non-perception. This absorption is also called neither existence nor non-existence. So these are very subtle aspects of samadhi. And while, I think we should be a bit careful in sort of adopting a Buddhist arrogance, saying, oh yeah, well, that's just worldly. Then these are admirable individuals, and it would be from this place that so many of the spiritual traditions that have in the world, they take their inspiration. Some of the accounts we have of great sages and so on refer to these very subtle aspects of spirituality. So this covers then the concentration of the childish, again from the point of view that it's still not on the path of perfect enlightenment. We then look at clearly discerning concentration for people who have entered one of the three vehicles, Shravakas, Pratyeka Buddhas, or Bodhisattvas, and are abiding on the paths of accumulation or joining, the two first of the five paths. It is through the concentration associated with vipassana that the path of seeing, i.e. liberation, seeing the nature of reality, is attained. This state of mind is known as clearly discerning concentration, where the name of the result is given to the cause. Tibetans have this expression, giving the name of the result to the cause. And it simply means that what we're engaging in now will be the cause of a particular result. It's a bit like when we call meditation for vipassana. In the Burmese tradition, they talk about vipassana meditation. And that's actually just, you could say, what will come from that practice. But of course, the path itself constitutes shamatha as much as any other path. But, with the practice over the years, then that brings about vipassana. In a way, it's the same thing when we talk about Mahamudra and Dzogchen. We might be Mahamudra practitioners or Dzogchen practitioners, but the name Dzogchen is really just the name that is applied to the result of what we are engaging in. So that's where this clearly discerning concentration then is what we that we then where we have an insight into the nature of reality. So that's where we arrive at having a vision or an understanding. That's then clear discerning. Then 108. From the first ground onward is the concentration of the noble ones, the immaculate and perfect concentration of the Tathagatas. The essence of all concentration is the holding of the mind within, the cause of which is steady mindfulness and diligence. So this is then when beings arrive at this first bhumi, the first ground of the bodhisattva path, then their concentration then is particularly free. It says here, perfect joy, the first ground of the noble bodhisattva path, is where the concentration of noble beings begins. By nature, it is immaculate, perfect wisdom. So the term immaculate, Jigme, is here used to denote the fact that this wisdom is an antidote for the belief in a self. So Jigme generally means that it's not tainted. It's not tainted by the ordinary confusion, such as belief in a self or duality. Later on, the path of no more learning, the wisdom of the Buddhas, is the perfect union of shamatha and vipassana, the ultimate stainless virtue. This excellent concentration is the transcendent perfection of concentration itself. So that's where we would say the first bhumi, which is named perfect joy, and that's where it's described because it's like we lay down a burden of this our existential angst, if you like, but the notion of a self and all the associated pain and worry and so on that comes with this association, when that's seen as simply just an unnecessary entanglement and there's a genuine experience of freedom, there is this joy that is associated with the first bhumi, the first bodhisattva ground. And then from there on, this insight then develops until the level of awakening, perfect awakening. Oh, getting a bit absorbed here. It's already an hour gone. Feel free to type in questions if you have. I think we'll just do one more and leave it at that. 109. When attention wanders, it is once again repaired. By acting thus is bliss engendered, wondrous siddhi gained. Such practice has as its result clairvoyance and the other powers. Kangyur Rinpoche says it is an essential feature of all concentrations that the mind is held one-pointedly within and not allowed to stray to any external distractions. This is accomplished and perfected by an uninterrupted mindfulness that never loses its referent and attitude and is accompanied by enthusiastic diligence. These are the factors on which concentration depends. If one loses one's concentrated mindfulness and is distracted to extraneous objects, one should at once vigilantly retrieve it and diligently meditate, thus mending or patching up one's concentration. Training in the common samadhis constitutes the basis for the bliss that arises from the well-trained flexibility of the body and mind, and for various miraculous powers. So that's where, now here there's some reference to this not getting distracted. And this again, this is where we'd want to be very reliant on a teacher's instructions. And so often the teacher would say, relax, it's predictable that the mind will get distracted. So when the mind is distracted, come back without having any regret. So where you could say in a culture where meditation is more commonly practiced, it's okay to sort of push a little bit and say, important to not for a moment lose mindfulness. Whereas for us who are in a culture where it's quite new, that kind of assertion would probably result in a little bit sort of a militant and excessively rigid approach to meditation. And that's why in practice, meditation teachers would say, practice a little bit, then relax, then practice a little bit. But together with this, then we have these sort of miraculous powers that are associated with such, you could say, focus. The accomplishment of the samadhis results in qualities enjoyed also by Shravakas, such as preternatural knowledge, for example, recollection, for example, of a previous existence, and the 8 dominant ayatanas. So that's where people, they might begin to know what other people are thinking, or having, you can say, impressive mental capacity. So the footnote says, Siginbe kimchi gye. So these are sort of the powerful experiences that you could say exceed other ordinary mental capacity. Okay. Hi. What would the differences between the Shravakayana and Pratyeka in the traditional 3 vehicle categorization? Many thanks. We typically say that the Shravakas, they understand absence of self in the person. And the Pratyeka Buddhas, they would understand the absence of self in the phenomena. So that's where we would say, and then the Bodhisattvas, they would have an understanding of the absence of self altogether with regards to all phenomena. So the Shravakayana more associated with the understanding how there's no self at the personal level, and the Pratyeka Buddhas, they're more about the understanding the selflessness in the world around. But they also have different. There's different. The Pratyeka is very much known as the self or self-centered Buddhas. They're very much associated with those who simply go and figure it all out themselves. They're on their own. They don't want to know about others. They do their own thing. And to some extent, then are regarded as having some results. But they're still Hinayana. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Okay. That's it. All right. We'll conclude with dedication. Let's just see if I have actually dedication. This, by the way, is written by Longchen Bang. For all our births, wherever we may be born, may we be endowed with the 7 good qualities of the higher realms. As soon as we're born, may we meet with the Dharma and have the freedom to practice it properly. At that time, may we please the holy gurus and practice the Dharma throughout the day and night. Realizing the Dharma and accomplishing its essential meaning, may we cross the ocean of existence in that life. Thoroughly teaching the holy Dharma in this world, may we never tire of accomplishing the benefit of others. By this vast benefit of others, without partiality or bias, may all attain Buddhahood together.